Mr. Bobker, and then Ms. Berman from Met. Mr. Bobker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gary Bobker with the Bay Institute. Really appreciate the intensive effort that staff and stakeholders have been making to try and improve this. Unfortunately, we don't really see this as responsive to most of the main concerns that have been raised by Bay Institute, NRDC, and other parties. I'll try to briefly run through where I think the major continuing areas of concern are. The first has to do with what I would characterize as the issue of absolute versus relative reliance on the delta. I raised this issue yesterday, and there's 2 points I want to make. The first is that TBI, NRDC, and others believe that this language, this policy won't achieve the intent of Section 85021 to use less water from the delta in terms of reducing the actual real vulnerability of water users to disruption of the delta or reducing the stressors on the delta. I've made that point before. I'm not going to belabor the point now. But there's an associated point I want to make in regard to the absolute versus relative reliance. And it seems to me that ultimately there's a serious inequity at the heart of this, which is that those parties involved in covered actions who are within the delta's watershed, who, for instance, are receiving water through a transfer, can only reduce their net use. Reducing their actual percentage of delta watershed water means reducing their net use. That's been raised by a number of delta watershed water users. Those who are exporting water from the delta, who are outside the watershed, actually have much greater access to alternative supplies. So the irony here is that those folks who have the most flexibility in terms of alternative supplies, which are also large urban districts in Southern California, which have a great deal of innovation and flexibility, are the ones that you don't really require to reduce the actual reliance on the delta just to access alternative supplies. So I'm not sure we get the end result we really want. Let me turn to a second set of issues, and that's sort of the trajectory of change here. The policy says significant change, and I'm not sure that I know what that means, and I'm not sure that water users know what that means. I am a broken record on the issue of performance targets and performance metrics. I don't regard performance metrics or targets as necessarily mandates, and very often they are aspirational or they represent a desired trajectory of change. There is no desired trajectory of change here. There's no guidance to water users on what represents a significant reduction or a significant increase in their local self-reliance. And so, to a certain extent, I don't know what it means, and I don't know that it will compel major change. The third set of issues I want to raise is measuring the outcomes. It seems to me that in many cases there are lots of plans and lots of project proposals that say this is intended to result in a certain benefit, where that benefit is either speculative or never really documented. The language here says that the plan should include the expected outcome. I think that's a good point, that we should articulate a measurable outcome, but I think you actually need to document actual outcomes when outcomes are occurring. That's not always the case in the early stages of implementation of many of the projects here, but at some point we expect them to actually do something and result in measurable improvements in the values that we have identified here, and I think that's got to be part of the part of the requirement here. It's in the list of things that you're asking water suppliers to comply with. I think also, along with the measurement issue, the issue of what you're measuring in terms of what baseline you're using, whether you're comparing results of reduced reliance or changes in the percentage of water from the delta. Is it in comparable years, one against the other? I mean, what are you using? I mean, the whole baseline issue is completely unilluminated here, and so it just makes it difficult to know whether, in fact, you're getting any benefits out of this process at all or not. The final, just a couple of cleanup comments, maybe. The first is that the words used in the Delta in the first sentence, I just think are, I think it's appropriate to include Delta users under covered action, in Delta users under covered actions, but I think diverted in the Delta may be a more precise term. Used in the Delta seems just pretty broad. I mean, if we said water shall not be used in any area of the Delta or its watershed or an area exporting from the Delta, obviously would be way too broad. So it seems to me if we're being more precise about exports and transfers than in Delta use, probably we need to be the same, and that would be in Delta diversions. And then secondly, there's just a question that I have, and if it's been discussed in some previous meetings that I missed, I apologize, but this policy only applies to suppliers that are receiving water. Should it not also apply to suppliers who are providing water?
You mean CVP and the Department of Water Resources?
It's not always the case that the projects are the source of...
What, wholesale agencies?
Yeah, I mean, does it apply to a water, if a water district is transferring water and it is not reducing its reliance, then should it be making water available for transfer? I mean, there's all kind of nuances here in terms of wanting, if you're conserving water and you protect the ability to transfer conserved water, that is not what I'm getting at here. I'm getting at the general compliance with plans to reduce your reliance. And so it just seems to me we need to tackle the issue of whether the transferor needs to be subject to the same threshold. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.